I do want to hit on, we're going to look at wheels and tires and the ballasting. And that's probably going to take up most of our time. I did prepare a section last night on exhaust after treatments, which I believe you guys should absolutely have to know. Your producers may not have after treatment exhaust on their equipment right now, but they will have it. They won't have a choice. That's just the way it is. Okay. I did check my facts last night, and 2017 is the drop dead date for off-highway pieces of equipment to meet the current on-highway emission standards.
And that's just for new vehicles, right?
Yes. Yeah, correct. And the majority of your manufacturers are meeting those standards right now. So if you see a tractor engine or a combine engine, swather, diesel engine, as it says, it meets Tier 4 final requirements, they're good to go. So our world, the ag world, actually the entire off-highway world is actually way ahead of the on-highway. On-highway, for example, not to pick on anyone, but Caterpillar, all the engine manufacturers, when they went to Tier 4 interim in 2010, had to meet those requirements. Well, Caterpillar didn't feel that they had enough time to do it, so they took a hit, and they had to pay so much money per engine after that as a fine to the EPA, and that cost them millions and millions of dollars. But had they released engines early and they had failed, it would have cost them a hell of a lot more. So they just took the hit and life went on. But now pretty much all those manufacturers are right up to speed. So it's been kind of nice that the on-highway, and even though they're semi-trucks, we refer to them as automotive applications, they have led the way as far as the applications for the off-highway. So if you're loaders in the mines and the ag tractors, the combines, the scrapers, all that sort of stuff. So they're actually up ahead of the game, to be quite honest. So wheels and tires. Here's my clicker. I haven't done anything, prepared anything for you on the tracked types of pieces of equipment. We have seen an example across the street of what you don't want to see. And just as a side note to that, Greg told me that he did call out to Torgerson's, and interestingly enough, and bothering me enough, is that when he talked to the service manager, he said, "Oh yeah, that's kind of a common problem." It's like, are you kidding me? That kind of bothers me, And it's not coming from Case IH, it's coming the oils from the oil supplier. So somewhere there's something happening in that food chain that should not be happening. So I would recommend that if you do have any of your producers with those tracked pieces of equipment, that's something they definitely should be checking. Because if those bearings will fail, I will guarantee you that. When those bearings fail, those two bogey wheels come apart. When those two bogey wheels come apart, it tracks off. And you've got a $500,000 piece of machinery equipment sitting on the ground in not a very good situation. And heaven forbid if there's anyone underneath or whatever. Because it's pretty serious in my mind. So, okay. Wheels and tires. We have two types. So Biasply, you're probably mostly going to be dealing with radial tires. All right. A lot of your, well, actually, I'll take that back. I'm seeing actually quite a few more Biasply tires out there on your smaller applications, your mechanical front wheel drives or front wheel assist type tractors, loader tractors. The larger four-wheel drives, the majority of what you're going to be dealing with the radial ply tires. We used to have a center here called the Northern Tractor Resource Center. I'm not sure if anyone's heard of that, but it was back in the early to mid 90s, and I was actually the director of that for a couple of years. But it was grant funded, soft money, so when we ran out of grants, the center kind of disappeared. So when we were doing that center, we spent a lot of time on what we would call setting up tractors so they would actually be efficient in the field. So we had a whole bunch of instrumentation. We had a strain gauge we would put between the tractor and the plow. We had a set of scales. We'd actually weigh the tractor. We're going to talk a little about that because you need to know the tractor weights as far as the ballasting goes. Correctly ballasting the tractor, so we'd have so a four-wheel drive tractor when it's running down the field, you want 50% of the tractive effort on the front axles and 50% on the rear axles, ideally, right? Well, there's going to be some weight transfer as when you put the plow on the ground, it kind of tips backwards. So now we have to adjust our weights so that when we transfer the weight from the front to the rear, theoretically, everything's 50-50. Okay, and we'll talk about that in the next slide when we get to ballasting. So a lot of this I've kind of taken liberty of stealing or plagiarizing or just borrowing whatever from those types of presentations we did, okay? So there's Biasply and there's Radioply. A lot of the stuff, you know, the construction of these two tires is different. They do say they have some different ride characteristics depending upon the air pressure and the application. But the care of the tires and what your producers should be inspecting doesn't change. All right, so what I'm talking about is they all should have in their shop or in their service truck, actually I have one in each of my vehicles, a good tire pressure gauge. How many of you guys have a good tire pressure gauge in your vehicles right now? Ooh, I'm actually impressed. Good job. Okay.
Mine's in my garage.
Oh, okay, I'll go with that.
I never know which car is going to have a low one, you know.
There we go.
And they're really expensive.
They are. On his seller, yeah. So next question is, so yeah, I applaud you for having those things. How often do we use them?
When the
We have
tire
a
looks
tire.
low.
No, wrong, way wrong answer.
When you have electronics that tell you what your tire pressure is.
Doing things now.
So let's visit about that.
Okay.
Do you actually trust that thing?
No.
That would actually be a hell no.
Well, it's pretty accurate when it says your tire pressure is low.
Do you want to bet?
Well, I mean, when you're driving around
And
and
it
it
gives you a
says,
warning.
yeah, you have low tire pressure, and then when you go check it, and it's low, and you find you have a nail in it, maybe. So,
Yeah, but what's the trigger pressure?
I don't know.
Yeah, see, that's a big.
Mine's usually below like 32 PSI. It says the tire's low.
Yeah, see, mine on my van, I've had it as low as 10 PSI and I didn't trigger it.
Wow.
So please do not trust those things. You know, they're a nice convenience, but if they don't work, they're not worth it, okay? So let's go back to our tire gauges, all right? So how often do we use them again? Forget about your little tire pressure sensor thingy-bobbers, okay? So I'm thinking we don't use them real often, right? So use yourselves as examples and project to your producers. They should be using those. And I don't care if it's their passenger car, if it's their $500,000 Steiger tractor, I could care less. They used to use them on a regular basis. The issue is if the tire pressure is low, the damage is done. And typically that's going to be to the sidewalls, not to the tread or to the ceiling bead. It's going to be the sidewalls, all right? And the biggest one is with these right here. When these radial tires are correctly inflated, if you were to look at the front of them, you'll actually see a little bulge in the sidewall, okay? Probably 99 out of 100 of your producers will think that they have a low tire. So they'll go and dump more air in it. Okay, so now we're overinflating the tire, which actually does just as much damage as an underinflated tire. Okay, so that's where they need to drag out the tire pressure gauge and see what the actual pressure is. You can't judge the pressure just by looking at the tire. It's never going to work. All right, I've never met anyone who can do that. Okay, so those tire gauges have to be obviously in a place they can get them. They also have to be accurate. And this is one case where spending more money is not necessarily better. Because I was that adage, well, if I can buy a $2 tire gauge, well, the $20 tire gauge must be, 10 times better. Well, no, not necessarily. When I was in business, I actually had a master gauge in my shop, and every tire gauge, before I used it, got tested on the master gauge. And the master gauge, tire gauges you can't calibrate. If they're not showing what they should, you toss them in the garbage, you get another one. The master gauge could be calibrated, and they got calibrated every 6 months. All right, so I would check them on there. If the gauge was good, we're good to go. If it wasn't, in the garbage, and I drag out another one. I've had some new $25 gauges right out of the box they weren't worth anything. Now they didn't go in the garbage, they just went back to the supplier. Okay, so I'm pretty sure, I think that both Tire-Rama and what's the tire place out? There's one out by the old Kmart out there. Haver Tire, I think it is. They both have master gauges. So, most of your good tire shops will have a master gauge. Your producers can run in, get their gauges checked, and they're good to go. Okay? Correct sizing. All right, we can have tires that are too big for the application. We can have tires that are too small for the application. So we're going to, the next slide, we're actually going to look at what is called a load inflation table. We can have them from anything from a little trailer all the way up to a heavy scraper earth moving machinery and everything in between. And they're all freely available on the web. And I've got two examples. I have one from firestoneag.com and what I believe is one from Michelin Commercial Tires, okay? I use these a lot, and I have got a lot of my customers on the web looking at these things. So it kind of does double duty. The load inflation tables, number one, we have to know what the load is. The load, I mean the weight. So load is not necessarily the correct terminology. It's actually the weight of the piece of equipment. So the tire is going to hold up the weight of that particular piece of equipment, correct? Yes?
We hope so.
No, it's not. The air is going to hold the weight of what is on that, okay? The tire just happened to be a vessel we put the air in, okay? That was a trick question, by the way, okay? So it depends upon what the weight on the air is as to how much air we need to have in the tire, okay? If you look at the sidewall of a tire, it will give you the maximum PSI that can be put in that tire. That's not necessarily what should be in the tire. Okay, your maximum might be right on the money. If you put the maximum there, it might be way overinflated. So if we get overinflated, and this is something you can tell your producers to look for, you look at the face of that tire. If the tire tread is wearing in the center, that tire is overinflated. All right, because the curvature, we should have a nice flat footprint, right? Well, the curvature, if it's overinflated, goes like this. All right? Now, if it's underinflated, and you look at the face of the tread of that tire, both of the edges will be worn, right? Because most of the pressure is on the edges. We actually have a little bit of a hump in the middle. We don't have a whole lot of pressure on the center. Now that's some real easy, diagnostic tools for your producers. If you look at the front of their vehicle, a piece of equipment, and both of the inside edges are worn evenly on both inside tires, that means that as far as an alignment, we're going toe out. So our tires are actually pointing out this direction. So as we drive down the road, we're kind of scuffing the inside. Now, if they're evenly worn on the outsides, that means we're actually kind of like a snow plow. Okay, so we're actually scuffing off those treads. That's some, and tires are damn expensive. They really are. A big four-wheel drive tractor, you're looking at least $2,000 a pop per tire, times 8 to get all 8 tires on there. All right, that doesn't include the disposal fee. Okay, most of the shops now are charging a disposal fee. Used tires is a huge problem. Okay, we will look at the correct sizing when we get to those load inflation tables. I've got a couple of good examples of some tractors we actually weighed here at the school, and they're what we saw we had, what we should have had, and what we actually had. Okay, quality. There is a myriad of different brands out there, and some are way better than others. I used to sell tires when I was in business, and I know some that I would definitely put on my own vehicle, and I know some I sure as hell wouldn't put on my vehicle, okay, just because I know what the quality of those tires is like, okay. Now your customer, or your producers are going to have their own preferences. Some of their preferences will be determined if they're in a small town. Well, it's going to be pretty limited as to what brands they can get. All right, but typically, I stocked about 4 different brands, but I could get probably about 44 different brands. So most of the tire shops in any little town, big town, can get tires if requested. All right, they might have to, your producer might have to buy 4 to make it worth the time. Well, that's okay. You should have the same tread and everything on all 4 cores anyway. Okay. So if you need to tell them that even though it might not be available on the rack, then if they can wait maybe a week or so, their supplier could probably order those tires in. All right, they need to get on the web and do their research. Okay, most of my research, well, the web wasn't a real big thing when I was in business, so most of my research was done was talking with salesmen. Well, salesmen, there's a lot of good tire salesmen. There's a lot of snake oil salesmen out there too. So whenever I got those salesmen, I would ask for data. So I wanted to see the spec sheets. I wanted to see independent test results. I'm kind of big on that stuff. If they couldn't supply it, I said, well, nice talking to you. If you can't back up your product with data, then, you know, I probably shouldn't be buying it, all right?
Can you order agricultural tires over the internet? I know you can commercial.
Tire rack, I know commercial. I'm not sure about ag tires. I really don't know. I guess I've never looked. Well, you know, there'll be some shipping involved, but I would suspect you probably could. You can order just about anything else over the internet. So I would suspect the answer would be yeah. You're probably going to pay some pretty big shipping costs, but I would suspect you could. Yeah. The only, you know, when you order, unless you have an in with someone who can mount and dismount those things,
Right.
well, those things suck. The only time I've ever done it was when we took off 8 Biasply tires on a 4-wheel drive tractor and put on 8 radial tires, and it was 95 to 100 degrees. That's one other time I'll ever do that. Yeah, oh man, that is very, very tough work. So unless you got the right tools, I just bite the bullet and have someone come out and just buy the tires from them and have them do all the work. Yeah. Even the tools are damn heavy.
Like, what if the guy's got one bad tire and, you know, should he go and just replace all 4 tires even though the other 3 are, you know, decent, but...
Depends, well, I guess...
Or all 8 tires, because, I mean, that's a big expense.
Yeah, it depends on what the application is. Yeah. If it's on a pickup truck, you know, my right rear tire is bad, I'd probably replace both on the same axle.
Sure.
If it's on a semi, I'm probably just replacing that one tire. On an ag tractor, sure as heck just the one tire. Yeah, yeah. It also depends upon how much tread's left on the remaining tires as well. You actually get better on in an agricultural tractor situation, you actually get better traction with a half-wore tire than you do with a new tire, because you have more surface contact area with the ground. So if you know, it's on one corner, if your tires are 2/3, 3/4 worn, you know, maybe you might be able to find a good used tire, or you might have to bite the bullet and look at replacing all the corners, you know, which is a very big financial investment, huge, on a big ag tractor, or even a little ag tractor.
Yeah, I know a lot of, I mean, for like a semi, they'll blow out an outside tire, they'll just move that inside tire outside and put one new tire inside.
On the inside, yeah. The one thing that I can tell you about that also is a thing called the rolling circumference. So if you took, so that same situation, we had one blowout. So now if I look at that inside dual and I put a tape measure around it, and I take that new tire and take a tape measure around it, they're going to be 2 different numbers. So in fact, one is actually going to have a larger diameter than the other, right? Well, now we're going to have an issue with possible axle windup, what we call axle, or a differential windup, excuse me. So because I have a bigger tire basically taking all the load versus smaller circumference tires on the other side, they're going to actually be traveling at different speeds. So now the differential is going to, well, it'll do its thing, but you're actually going to take life off your differential. And those things, you know, you're going to spend probably $4,000 across the axle on tires. You're going to spend $7,000 on that differential when it goes out. All right, so you got to kind of weigh that financial thing there as well. Okay, does that kind of make sense? All right. The other thing too is if once you put a load on that semi, because that one new tire has a higher circumference, it is taking all the weight on that one corner. The smaller, older used tire would move from inside to outside, not taking a whole lot of weight. So now we're putting extra stress on those bearings and that one new tire as well. So, you know, there's a lot of other things just, you know, versus the financial, we have to weigh up on that as well. Yeah. And on that note, I've seen, you know, on semis, they've come into my shop where the front drive axle has a different size tire than the rear drive axle. Across the axle, we have one size on the rear, and across the axle, we have a different size on the front. And well, it doesn't hurt anything. Well, actually, yeah, it does, because now we're spinning the living crap out of one of those differentials. And it's not a matter of if it fails, it's going to matter when it's going to fail. But we will take a lot of life off that very expensive component. And it's a battle, it's a very big battle to try and convince me, my customers, or you guys, your producers, that they should have all the same size in all 4 of your drive axles especially. I mean, steer tires, it really doesn't matter. if it's a different size, but definitely on the drive axles. And on steer tires, you may not know this, but on a steer tire on highway, you absolutely cannot have a recap tire, a retread. That's against the law. Okay, and I've caught a lot of my customers on that one. And in fact, some of them, there was a couple that come into my shop. It was just a matter of time before the tire blew out because the tread was actually starting to lift. And I just said, you're not going anywhere, I'm shutting you down. Well, you can't do that. And I says, well, it's either going to be me or I call the DOT and they will shut you down. And we went through a little piss and match, and life was good after that, but they kind of understood where I was coming from because they really didn't understand what was going to happen. That front steer tire blows out, ooh boy, that's a really bad deal, okay? Now, agricultural tractor, well, that really doesn't matter, okay? Inflation, we talked about the radial bulge. Let's get to load inflation tables. So actually, we're going to look at this first before we get to our load inflation tables.